The sound of motorcycle engines roared through the night as Sarah Martinez limped toward her car, her crutches clicking against the wet pavement. Behind her, the high school reunion was still in full swing, filled with the same people who had just spent the evening whispering about her disability and asking invasive questions about why someone so young needed walking aids. What they didn't know, what they couldn't see beneath her elegant dress, was the Purple Heart medal resting in her purse, earned during 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic. When 6 leather-clad figures surrounded her in the parking lot, demanding her keys and laughing at her helpless condition, they had no idea they were about to face a decorated war hero who had saved lives under enemy fire and earned her injuries protecting her fellow soldiers. Sarah Martinez adjusted her grip on her crutches as she approached the decorated entrance of the Riverside High School gymnasium. 20 years had passed since graduation, and the familiar butterfly knot in her stomach reminded her why she'd almost decided not to come. The sound of laughter and music drifted through the open doors, mixing with memories she'd tried hard to leave behind. Her navy blue dress was carefully chosen to be elegant yet practical, accommodating the reality of her mobility aids. In her small purse, wrapped in soft cloth, lay her Purple Heart medal, a weight she carried everywhere but showed to no one. 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic had changed everything about her life, including the shrapnel in her left leg that made the crutches necessary. As she entered the gymnasium, transformed with twinkling lights and nostalgic decorations, conversations seemed to pause. Eyes followed her movement across the room, and she could already hear the whispered questions beginning. What happened to Sarah Martinez? Wasn't he the quiet one? Such a shame, so young to be disabled. The familiar sting of assumptions washed over her. People saw the crutches first, then made their judgments. They didn't see the lives she'd saved in field hospitals under rocket fire, or the convoy she'd helped defend when insurgents attacked their medical unit. They didn't know about the night she'd crawled through enemy territory to reach wounded soldiers, or the bronze star that accompanied her Purple Heart. Jenny Morrison, former head cheerleader and still perfectly put together, approached with a group of their old classmates. Sarah, oh my goodness, look at you. Her voice carried that particular tone of pity wrapped in false enthusiasm. We heard you had some kind of accident. How are you managing? Sarah forced a smile, her military training helping her maintain composure under scrutiny. I'm doing well, Jenny. Thank you for asking. She chose not to correct the accident assumption, explaining her service record to people who saw her as an object of pity, felt pointless. Well, you look nice, Jenny continued, her eyes obviously focused on the crutches. Are you working? Are you able to work? The question carried the familiar patronizing undertone Sarah had learned to recognize everywhere she went. Behind Jenny, Mike Peterson, former football captain, whispered loudly enough for Sarah to hear. Remember when she used to run track? Life really hits some people harder than others. His comment drew knowing nods from the group, as if her current mobility was somehow a character flaw rather than the result of defending her country. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, a reaction her army buddies would have recognized as a warning sign. During her deployment, she'd earned respect through her actions under pressure. She'd performed emergency surgery in a bunker while mortars exploded overhead and had rappelled from helicopters to reach wounded soldiers in hostile territory. The idea that these people saw her as diminished or pitiable would have been laughable if it weren't so frustrating. I keep myself busy, Sarah replied diplomatically, not mentioning her work with veteran organizations or her part-time consulting with military medical units. Her civilian career was successful and fulfilling, but explaining it to people who had already decided she was a victim seemed pointless. The conversation continued around her, with classmates sharing their career achievements and family updates while occasionally throwing her pitying glances. She noticed how they spoke slightly louder to her, as if the crutches affected her hearing, and how they seemed surprised when she demonstrated normal intelligence and humor. The evening wore on with Sarah becoming increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by people she'd once known well. As the night progressed, Sarah found herself gravitating toward the quieter corners of the reunion. She watched her former classmates dance and laugh, remembering a time when she might have felt left out or hurt by their attitudes. Now, having faced real danger in life or death situations, their shallow judgments seemed almost trivial. David Chen, who had been genuinely kind in high school, approached her near the refreshment table. "Sarah, it's really good to see you. I heard through the grapevine that you served in the military." His question was respectful, without the pitying tone she'd heard all evening. "Yes, I was a combat medic," she replied, grateful for his straightforward approach. "3 tours in Afghanistan." David's expression shifted to one of genuine respect. "That's incredible. Thank you for your service. I can't imagine what that was like." He paused, glancing at her crutches. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but was that where—" "Yes," Sarah nodded. "Roadside bomb during my final tour. I was treating wounded soldiers when it happened." She didn't mention the Purple Heart or the circumstances that earned it. How she'd stayed conscious long enough to stabilize 2 critically injured Marines before allowing herself to be evacuated. Their conversation was interrupted by Jenny's voice from across the room, speaking to another group, but clearly intended for Sarah to hear. "It's so sad about Sarah. She was always so active in school, and now she can barely walk. Makes you grateful for what you have, doesn't it?" Sarah felt the familiar flame of anger rise in her chest, the same fire that had driven her to excel in military training and push through rehabilitation after her injury. She'd conquered mountains that these people couldn't imagine, yet they saw her as an object of pity. As the evening wound down and people began heading to their cars, Sarah decided she'd had enough nostalgia for one lifetime. It was time to leave this chapter of her past where it belonged, in the past. The cool night air was a relief as Sarah made her way across the parking lot, her crutches navigating the uneven asphalt with practiced ease. The reunion had ended exactly as she'd expected, with her feeling more like a spectacle than a welcomed classmate. Behind her, the gymnasium still glowed with lights and echoed with the sounds of people reluctant to end their trip down memory lane. She was halfway to her specially equipped Honda Civic when the rumble of motorcycle engines cut through the quiet night. 6 figures on bikes pulled into the parking lot, their leather jackets and bandanas marking them as trouble. Sarah's military instincts immediately went on alert, her senses sharpening in a way that her former classmates inside the reunion would never understand. The bikers spread out in a loose formation, blocking her path to her car. Their leader, a heavy-set man with gang tattoos covering his arms, killed his engine and dismounted. Well, what do we have here?" His voice carried the confident cruelty of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Looks like someone's having trouble getting around." Sarah's grip on her crutches shifted subtly, her body automatically assuming a defensive stance that looked casual to untrained eyes. 3 years of combat experience had taught her to read threats quickly, and everything about this situation screamed danger. The parking lot was mostly empty now, with only a few stragglers still saying their goodbyes near the building. "Evening, gentlemen," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying none of the fear they expected to hear. "Just heading to my car." She'd learned in the service that projecting confidence could sometimes diffuse situations before they escalated, though her assessment of these particular individuals suggested they were looking for trouble regardless. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the surrounding cars. "Your car? That's funny, lady. See, my boys and I are having a bit of a cash flow problem tonight, and you look like someone who might be generous enough to help us out." His companions chuckled at his mock politeness, moving closer to form a tighter circle around Sarah. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah replied, her tone remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. Her military training was kicking in automatically. Assess the threats, ID, identify escape routes, prepare for engagement. 6 opponents, all larger than her, but they clearly saw her crutches as a sign of helplessness. Their first mistake. "No misunderstanding at all, Gimpy," sneered one of the younger gang members, a thin man with prison tattoos across his knuckles. "You're going to hand over your purse, your car keys, and whatever cash you've got. And since you can't exactly run away, this should be real easy for everyone involved." The circle tightened around her, and Sarah felt the familiar calm that had descended over her during firefights in Afghanistan. Time seemed to slow as her combat-trained mind cataloged everything. The leader's position, the weapons she could see, the spacing between her attackers. In her purse, along with her Purple Heart, was the tactical knife she'd carried since her service days. More importantly, in her body was the muscle memory of 3 years fighting for her life and the lives of others. "Gentlemen, I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," Sarah said, her voice taking on a tone her army unit would have recognized immediately. It was the voice of someone who had faced down armed insurgents and lived to tell about it. "I'm not as helpless as you think I am." The leader burst into laughter. "Did you hear that, boys? The cripple's threatening us." He reached toward her purse with confident arrogance. "Maybe we'll take our time teaching you some manners after we get what we came for." His hand never reached her purse. In one fluid motion, Sarah shifted her weight to her right crutch and swung the left one in a perfect arc, catching him across the temple with enough force to drop him to his knees. Before his companions could react, she had reversed the crutch grip and driven the rubber tip into the solar plexus of the nearest attacker, doubling him over, gasping for air. The remaining 4 bikers stared in shock as their leader struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his temple. The thin man with prison tattoos reached inside his jacket, clearly going for a weapon. But Sarah was already moving. Years of combat medical training had taught her anatomy better than any of them could imagine. She knew exactly where to strike to disable without killing. Her right crutch caught the thin man's wrist with surgical precision, sending whatever he'd been reaching for skittering across the asphalt. A quick follow-up strike to his knee sent him crashing down beside his leader. 2 more attackers rushed her simultaneously, clearly expecting her limited mobility to make her an easy target. They learned differently. Sarah dropped into a combat crouch, using her crutches like matched fighting sticks in a deadly dance she'd perfected during hand-to-hand combat training. The first attacker took a crutch to the ribs that cracked bone, while the second found himself on the ground with his arm twisted at an unnatural angle. "What the hell?" gasped the leader, finally understanding that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. The woman they'd targeted as an easy victim was systematically dismantling his crew with military precision. "Who are you?" Sarah straightened up, not even breathing hard, her crutches once again supporting her weight as if the violent encounter had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The 2 remaining bikers backed away, their confidence completely shattered. Round her feet, 4 grown men groaned in pain, none of them seriously injured, but all of them thoroughly defeated. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, United States Army Medical Corps," she replied calmly, reaching into her purse. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Bronze Star recipient. She pulled out her Purple Heart medal, the medal catching the parking lot lights. "And this is why I need the crutches. Shrapnel from a roadside bomb I survived while saving the lives of 6 Marines under enemy fire." The remaining gang members stared at the medal, finally understanding what they'd encountered. This wasn't a disabled victim. This was a decorated war hero who had survived battles they couldn't imagine. "Now," Sarah continued, tucking the medal back into her purse, "you gentlemen are going to help your friends to their bikes and ride away. And if I ever see any of you near a school or anywhere families gather, you'll discover that tonight was me being gentle." The bikers didn't need to be told twice. They gathered their wounded companions and departed with a speed that would have been comical under different circumstances. As their engine noise faded into the distance, Sarah heard applause behind her. Several of her former classmates had witnessed the encounter from the gymnasium entrance, including Jenny Morrison, whose expression had transformed from pity to something approaching awe. Sarah Martinez walked to her car that night with her head held high, knowing she'd finally shown her old classmates who she really was. The woman they'd pitied and whispered about was actually a hero who had served her country with distinction and continued to serve her community every day. Her crutches weren't a sign of weakness. They were a badge of honor, earned in service to others and carried with pride. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Sarah reflected on how the evening had unfolded. She'd attended the reunion hoping to reconnect with her past, but instead had been reminded of why her present was so much better. She was surrounded by fellow veterans who understood her worth, worked in a field where her skills were valued, and lived each day knowing she'd made a difference in the world. The people who had mocked her disability would go home that night with a new understanding of what true strength looked like. They'd witnessed firsthand that heroism doesn't disappear with injury. It evolves, adapts, and continues to shine when the moment demands it. Sarah's Purple Heart had indeed spoken volumes, not through words, but through the actions of the warrior who carried it. Heroes walk among us every day, often carrying invisible wounds and untold stories of courage. Our veterans have sacrificed for our freedom, and their strength doesn't diminish when they face challenges. It transforms into something even more powerful. If this story touched your heart and reminded you to look beyond surface appearances to see the heroes around us, please subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage, service, and the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. Share this story to honor all ye done. We're veterans who continue fighting battles both seen and unseen, and remember that true strength often walks quietly among us, asking for nothing but deserving our deepest respect.